Through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy upon us and save us. Hello, this presentation is called Financial Models, Paying for an Orthodox Christian Education. And what I want to do is just prepare, work through some thoughts that I've been percolating on for the last couple of years as we have founded and are running a church school. How do we get more of these? Start with some basic assumptions. What is a school? It's not a product, but it is a service, kind of like a business. A Disneyland is a place where you pay money to go have an experience. You don't walk away with any product. A maid service or a restoration service, you pay for a result. You want something to be the case at the end. Driver's Ed or Duolingo give you skills or abilities. When you go to boot camp, the goal is to break down your identity and rebuild it into something that the military can use. So school is a service that parents provide for their children through the means of these contractual sort of relationships with schools. Now, there is a product in the sense that in our contemporary American culture, a degree or a GPA have a publicly traded value that you can use to leverage into colleges, scholarships, prestige, and so on. The same is true for sports ability that can get you scholarships. However, more important for our purposes is Christian formation. We are training ourselves and our children to worship God. And we are building friendships that will last a lifetime and will support us through the slings and arrows of this outrageous earthly life. So school is fundamentally a way of arranging a meeting place for masters and students to conduct education. It's more complicated than that, but that's the essence. School for Orthodox Christians is also an extension of our parish life. We go to church to learn. We learn from the homily, we learn from the synaxarion, we learn from the prayers. It's an extension of our family life. We come together with our siblings and with our church family. It's also an extension of our social life, that space between the state or politics and the family is the social. Think about what a child is going to do during the course of a school year. Be with friends, go to parties or school dances, be in classes. Eventually, probably there will be some dating, marriages, the formation of hobbies and clubs, the formation of interests, and of course, interaction with teachers that have the potential to be true mentors to these children. So school is for a significant period of 13 years or more, their whole life. That's the bread, the whole loaf, whatever ingredients are in there, it's one loaf of bread. The cost and expense of providing the service is, for most private schools, it's mostly salaries. It's also supplies and having a location to meet and other student services. The revenue is tuition, and for a private school, also donations. So what does it take to start school? I'm going to argue very simply, it takes three ingredients: vision, motivation, and capital. The head, the heart, and the hands. I like this alliteration: the mind, the money, and the muscle. The vision, we have to have a good answer for why we are doing education at all and why we're doing it in our particular way as Orthodox Christians. We have to have a good vision of human nature. What is it that we are serving? What are these little human beings and what is their potential? And a good vision for the nature of our education in particular, and how it complements but does not replace the church, and how it complements but does not replace family and friends. The motivation, we need to have a sense of the dire need for schools that are not subject to the powers of the world, that are not indoctrination towards functional atheism, or political revolutionary thought. We need energetic and dynamic leaders, donors, and trustees who get it. We need dedicated or desperate parents with young children who are ready to pay or ready to volunteer and make it happen. We need knowledgeable, joyful, kind, and committed teachers and coaches and musicians and all of the people that come together. And then the capital. We need sufficient capital to start. It costs money to start a website, rent a building, buy curriculum, hire teachers. And so we need savvy pricing models that match the community that we're particularly working with, and realistic budgets. And here's the key: if we want to go not just local one at a time, but if we want to build some kind of a national network or complement each other, we need a massive pool of business-backed donors. These could be private nonprofit foundations belonging to families or organizations. They could be individual businessmen. They could be church-specific endowments, educational endowments, or school-specific endowments. But we need that visionary leadership behind putting the capital together and making realistic budgets to make these schools happen. So for the rest of this presentation, I want to talk about why the heck it's worth all this money, and then how to pay for not just one or two, but 10 or 50 Orthodox Christian schools in the next few decades. Why start a school? Education is impractical, right? This is an objection. Most people in most places at most times learn practical life skills such as job skills or social skills or even survival skills simply by osmosis. If you're raised in a functional culture, then you learn the wisdom of the village from the wisdom of the village. You grow up and learn what you need to survive and thrive in the family, well, by living. And when it comes to adult life, the quote unquote real world we're trying to prepare students for, what occupies us adults most of the time is working for our daily bread, our jobs that sustain us. Maybe we're not farmers as much as we used to be, but we're out there just trying to earn money. So if we really just cared about our children being able to provide for themselves, school actually isn't that important. We think of job training, but the liberal arts and academics and all these abstract topics, they're not going to help you survive. Until the 1850s, the majority of Americans were subsistence farmers. It was over 50%. I think it was 80% this time. I have to double check that. Until the 1990s, the majority of Chinese were subsistence farmers. This is normal, historically speaking. Education is also expensive, and it always has been. It's always been the privilege of the aristocratic few to be able to afford private tutors who understand abstract arts and sciences, such as law, medicine, theology, and philosophy. Even learning to read and write wasn't necessarily necessary for the farming class, which was the majority of people. Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic societies are actually abnormal. They are weird, if you haven't seen that acronym. They're weird societies. It's becoming more normal. More than half the globe lives in a metropolis or in a city rather than in the country. And that tipped, I think, over the last couple of years. But that's also weird. Specialized education requires schoolmasters. And being a schoolmaster is a leisurely job. It requires that someone else has enough means to pay you that you don't have to go work on the farm. Education of the bookish type, philosophy, law, medicine, and theology, simply does not arise without leisure. Leisure is defined as freedom from manual labor. Leisure is something we have a lot of in a modern culture, which is why we've attempted to make education a mass democratic thing. Whether we've succeeded or not is a question. When you think of education, classically so-called, don't think of career training, but instead think of knowledge of medicine, law, theology, and philosophy, mathematics, history, grammar. This knowledge is the absolute opposite of useful and practical and hence it's the most precious type of knowledge. We don't care so much about practical things. A wine opener, a fork, these things are not precious to us. What's precious to us is the fine china that you never actually use for a cup of tea, or the piece of art that has no functional purpose in your house, but it's the prized possession. Disciplines like astronomy and music are not practical, and that's why we love them so much. They give us access to the secrets of the cosmos, knowledge for its own sake. Now, if education is so expensive and impractical, why not just use the public schools? Those are free. Well, until we have widespread school choice, which we can hope for, it will have its own challenges if we do have money coming from the government for Orthodox Christian schools, which is already happening in Florida, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and other places, Arizona. But free education via public schools is basically money that's been sourced through taxation, co-opted by our governments, and directed toward an anti-religious indoctrination of our youth into folly and vice. If that's free, I don't know what could be more expensive. So why start schools? Because education is essential. Yes, it's impractical. That's the point. Yes, it's expensive. We're going to deal with that, but it's essential. Our children spend 12,000 hours at school over 13 years. If you think they can spend 12,000 hours not talking about God, around immorality, around just vapid emptiness, around smartphones, around secular teachers and mentors, and not be formed into functionally becoming secular human beings, if you think that the church can overcome that wave of pressure simply by going to church for an hour and a half for the divine liturgy on Sundays, you're kidding yourself. We need to preserve our culture. Education is the passing of the soul of one generation to the next, Chesterton said, paraphrasing. Education is where we form a tight-knit community and lifelong friendships. I'm still friends with one of my best friends from 6th grade, I believe. I'm still friends with many of my college friends, a few of my high school friends, as much as I'm friends with my brothers and sisters in flesh. School is where children receive individualized attention, not from their parents. Parents, we have blind spots. We try to help our kids, but we need that non-parental mentor to come in and expose them to new ways of thinking, to new truths, to new behaviors that will actually serve them. School is where we can, as Orthodox Christians, grow in the faith, and education sets up eternal success, sanctity, rewards in heaven for teachers and for students, teachers who give their life away in Christ-like service. We can evangelize to our children and to visitors who come to our Orthodox schools, and thus expand the kingdom of God. Education is completely natural to our parish life. So how do we do it? Here's where we get practical. Public schools spend about $14,000 per student in my state of California, $12,000 per student in Oklahoma. Charters get anywhere, when they have a voucher, from $7,000 to $9,000, the ones I've talked to, in Florida and Arizona. Private schools vary widely. You don't see many private schools with a tuition lower than $6,000 in 2023 dollars. But you do see some private schools that are more expensive than my college education at $35,000 per student. Boarding schools can be as much as $50,000. The high school where George Bush and George Bush's son, I believe, George Bush Jr. went, were more than $35,000. And this money varies widely on services and auxiliary programs provided. There's a variety of models. You can have a full community school that's 5 days, probably need more than 30 families. That would be something like 60 to 80 kids. You can have 1 day, 3 day parochial schools that are a little bit smaller, maybe university model, from anywhere between 5 and 30 families. And you can also homeschool. using online resources, using just books and your parents, or banding together with maybe 3, 4, 5 other families. And homeschool can be virtually free from a monetary perspective. There's a lot of free resources online. You just buy the books, and you don't have to pay teachers. You don't have to pay the parents to teach their own kids. And if you partner with somebody, then you can do it all in-house. So the cost varies widely, but what are we actually getting for that? How do we get our maximum buck, our maximum bang for our buck? I'm going to give you 4 examples and look at the numbers and suggest a model that we should use as Orthodox Christians going forward from 2023 to 2053. Plain Jane Church Academy, Fancy Private School Academy, and Bootstrap Homeschool Academy. Let's look at each of those. Plain Jane Church Academy, let's suppose, has 200 students. It has a $7,500 sticker price, the MSRP. But that is, of course, discounted through scholarships. So if you have 200 students times 75,000, you have a nominal budget of 1.5 million. However, that is deducted from a nice, big, fat, almost 30% scholarship distribution. Those are distributed to teachers' kids, maybe given to people based on their socioeconomic status, maybe based on the needs of the school. If there's low enrollment, they want to attract people. So they're actually collecting 1.1 million in tuition, and they do an annual fundraiser every year. They do a gala or a banquet, and people donate about $100,000. Plain Jane Church Academy has no endowment, and that's going to be important. So they have a 1.2 million actual annual budget. Divide that by 200 students, gets you 6,000 per student actually spent. This is fairly normal. Now, if you have a class of 18 students, one way to think about this is, how much does that classroom make? How much does that classroom cost? So it's a little microcosm of the whole budget. Well, just round numbers. Because Plain Jane Academy is focused on academics, but also Christian formation, they don't have a whole ton of expenses. They want to pay their teacher $65,000, a living wage, maybe not a lot of perks and benefits, but the teacher can get by, at least if they're not in the middle of their earning years. $15,000 goes to administration, and $28,000 goes to everything else. For example, you could have supplies on there, rent, utilities, college advising or other services if there are any, sports, and so on. Fancy Private School Academy has the same number of students, let's suppose, but they have a $13,000 sticker price. That leads to a $2.6 million nominal budget. Now, Fancy Private School Academy, let's suppose, has a massive scholarship fund because they don't want to just appeal to fancy private prep school families. Okay, so they get $800,000 off that sticker price to collect only 1.8 million. They also do annual fundraising, but because they do have a few higher socioeconomic status, a few wealthier families, and maybe a bigger reach, they fundraise 200,000 annually, no endowment. So their actual budget somewhere around 2 million. Now you divide that 2 million by 200 students, you get exactly 10,000 per student actually spent. That's a nice big buffer. That's 180,000 per 18 student classroom. These are still small classrooms, unlike the public schools that are pushing 30 and plus. So where does that go? Fancy Private School Academy is focused on athletics, a little bit of maybe character formation, but let's suppose they're really about athletics and social events. That's what the parents demand. That's what the parents experience in their high school years, and they want to pay for it. You're going to get $65,000 still to the teacher because that's a market wage. You're going to get a lot more towards administration, 30 over 15, because there's more directors, there's athletics, there's admissions, there's fundraising, there's college counseling, there's an assistant principal, there's an assistant to the assistant principal, assistant to the manager. And then you're going to have this big pool of $85,000 per classroom for everything else that might pay for dances, sports, theater, senior trips, arts, after-school programs, childcare for teachers, etc. And importantly, Fancy Private School Academy is collecting so much money, people are happy to pay the tuition, they're getting the value that they want out of the service. They're also able to put away $5,000 per classroom into savings for an endowment for the future. Let's look at Bootstrap Homeschool Academy. Bootstrap Homeschool Academy, let's suppose, only has 50 students, and they've been at their 50 student limit for a long time, and they're not likely to grow. They've got a $5,000 sticker price and a $250,000 nominal budget, 5,000 times 50. Now, Bootstrap Homeschool Christian Academy tried doing scholarships, but they realized they were going to go bankrupt. And so they ended up lowering the price and saying, if you can't pay, you can't come. So they have no scholarships. They do some annual fundraising events. They raise $50,000 a year on average. They have no endowment. So now we've got $300,000 to spend and about $6,000 per student actually spent. Notice that it's not actually cheaper than our first school of Plain Jane Christian Academy. Although there's a smaller student body and lower tuition, there are natural limits to what money can be saved by pinching and saving here and there. So you have less students, you have less budget, you have less teachers, but you can't go very low, below 6,000. So where does the money go? 72,000 per 12 student classroom. Let's suppose they're a bit smaller. There's 4 grades or something like that. That gives you a $33,000 teacher salary, no benefits, no paid time off, no insurance or perks, and the teacher likely has a child enrolled in the school. 17,000 toward administration. There's probably only one admin or principal. The rest of the administrative team are the board of directors, parents, or volunteers, and $12,000 toward everything else, including things like rent, utilities. Maybe they have a facility that's donated to them. Maybe they meet in somebody's house. But you probably have a volunteer front desk, office person. You probably have volunteer supervision. Not a lot of other paid staff positions besides teachers. Is there a best way? Each of these models are going to work depending on the community. Plain Jane Christian Academy is going to be middle of the road, attract mostly middle class faithful, or assuming that these are Orthodox Christian schools, all of them. Teachers are paid decently, but they mostly do it for love of the work. They mostly love the kids, or they want to serve their own kids. It's also probably mostly local and endemic to one specific church or a couple of parishes. Plain Jane Church Academy is culturally strong with few temptations to worldliness. They are tight-knit, but they're also continually fundraising because things always feel tight. There's not a lot of margin. Now, Fancy Private School Academy, although we're trying to be Orthodox, we're high-end, attract rich faithful as well as secular counterparts, because your secular neighbor sees how great the school is, what the results are, and they can pay the tuition. They'd rather do that than go to a Catholic school or a public charter because it's full and so on. Teachers are paid well. This has an upside that it attracts career-minded professionals. Some people might even move across the country to make it work. They find out about you and shoom, move across the country, bring their family. But that also brings with it the downside of the temptation to worldliness. When you introduce sports, then you introduce money. When you introduce money, you introduce worldliness. You also introduce these political pressures to go woke. Success pushes people toward the left. You are continually fundraising at Fancy Private School Academy, but it's mostly because of shrewd financial management. You know that people want to donate, want to contribute, and you're stocking away money to build that library, to repave that parking lot, to have custom art painted in the front foyer. So it's kind of more branded spending that you're building up for. Bootstrap Homeschool Academy is low end. It attracts more poor and middle class families who already homeschool. and who want complete autonomy. The teachers are there because they do it for the love of it, or maybe there's tuition remission. Nobody's there for a career. And it's probably all local people, not real attractive to somebody who's not already in the community. Bootstrap might do occasional fundraising because there's scholarship requests, but that's not really part of the core model. So those are the three options. What is the fourth option, if there is one? I call it Patron-Blessed Academy. Okay. I made this spreadsheet. It's a bit of information that just shows you what was on the last slides. And basically what you're getting is, with raising tuition, is you're getting teacher salaries, teacher benefits, and more student services if the parents want them. And you're, with raising tuition, you're actually raising the scholarship fund, in one sense, ironically, opening up your doors to families that have lower income because you have more scholarship money in the pool to distribute. Patron-Blessed Academy, let's suppose, splits the difference. They have 200 students. Their tuition's not 13,000 or 7,000, but 9,000, which gives them a $1.8 million nominal budget. They also distribute 400,000 in scholarships, which is a little bit under 25%. They collect 1.4 million. They do annual fundraising, a gala, a fun run, car washes, and so on. But there's a new line item here, 200,000 in endowment income from a $4 million endowment. That's 5% of a $4 million endowment. That gives a total budget of 1.7 million. Now we're spending, remember, fancy private school is spending 10,000 per student. We're pretty close to 10,000 per student actually spent, but we didn't charge that $13,000 sticker price. An 18-person classroom in Patron-Blessed Academy would contribute $150,000. Where would this go? Patron-Blessed Academy is still focused on academics and Christian formation, like its smaller counterpart, its tighter, leaner budget, but there's a sprinkle of extra services. You've got the teacher with benefits that you can hopefully keep for the duration of their career, or at least 10 years before they maybe go back to graduate school or have a third kid and decide to stay home. There's enough money for administration to pay for special services and sports. And there's 58,000 left over for all of those attractive services that parents may want. So Patron-Blessed Academy is the best of both worlds. It's scalable. We can have as many of these as we have endowments or foundation funds for. They provide lots of scholarship money to diversify the income levels. It's not just for the rich kid. It's not just for the middle class. It's not just for the low income. We have stability for teachers through higher salaries and perks. Teacher turnover creates instability for the kids. It lowers the quality of education. Teachers who know their classroom, who love their subject, and who stay for a long time influence the culture of the school and create stability. It also has low annual fundraising requirements. If Patron-Blessed Academy does fundraising, those funds can be invested in future projects, just like the fancy private school, or they can be returned to the foundation or to their own future endowment. So annual fundraising is still very much a reality, but it's not a necessity. So when you look at this chart, you see that the total tuition collected is right in between these two. You see that the scholarship fund is as much as this one, but the total budget is higher. The spend per student is higher. The teacher salaries and benefits are better, and the student services are there. How could we do this? There's a variety of examples, and I think we should do them all, but we should consider them all and see which one fits. Each individual parish or school can create its own endowment with a target of $2 million per school. Don't launch until you have the funds. This article by a fellow called let's see, Kamal. It's about founding parish schools. I'll have to look up the name here. What he says is, don't start until you have enough dividends at 5% to pay for half of the headmaster's salary or the first teacher if you're starting with one grade. For example, half of a $40,000 salary is $20,000. So you would want a $400,000 minimum raise for the endowment. That could take a year, or that could take 10 years, right? $40,000 a year for 10 years that the church puts aside. And you've got $40,000 for your first salary for your first teacher, or half of the $40,000. If you want to do half of an $80,000 salary for your headmaster or a teacher or two teachers, you need an $800,000 endowment before you launch the school, according to this article. And if you want half of $120,000 for a really top-notch professional educator with experience who's already a principal, let's say, of another school, and you're pulling them in to help start your thing, you would need a significant endowment of $1.2 million before you start. There are free training programs like the Herzog Foundation that you can use along the way of raising money to train your board, your headmaster, your teachers, so that when you do start, you're starting with a vision. So that would be each individual parish doing this. If they're committed, if the priest is committed and the faithful are committed to starting a school one day, start raising money now and putting it aside. If you already have an educational endowment, think about using it instead of just for Sunday school, catechism, church education. Think about having a private parochial school. We can also pool funds. For example, one of the things I'm considering doing is raising money, starting an educational foundation or getting on board with one that already exists, so that private investor donors can put money into an educational foundation aimed at raising $2 million per school in its network. For example, if there was 5 schools in our Orthodox network, which I'm affectionately calling the National Orthodox Unified Schools, or NOOS for short, we would only need to raise a $10 million endowment from Orthodox all over the country. If we had 50 schools that we were supporting, we would need $100 million in this endowment. It's a significant amount of money, but if we're talking about a national Orthodox effort, I don't think it's impossible. We could also, as a creative idea, an investment fund could be created, a for-profit investment fund to buy houses and provide perks for teachers, free or at-cost housing for teachers and admin around the campus. Investors could invest in the fund could buy houses and have a contractual relationship with each school. Those donor funds or investor funds are preserved in the real estate, but the donation is that they don't take the cash flow. They just simply grow the equity. Now, a third option, so private, each individual parish, a private sort of national foundation, the Archdiocese of the Antiochian Archdiocese, which I'm a part of, or the Greek Archdiocese, could decide to pool funds toward education if we had a common vision for this. $200,000 cash per school per year for a limited time while it gets its feet. Or the Archdiocese could build a massive fund that's not distributing cash directly, but is distributing the dividends from that fund to however many schools it can. And then I would also suggest a give back cycle. For example, if a school comes to someone like me or someone like Herzog, and they say, we want to start a school, there's going to be a 1 to 2 year onboarding pipeline for these new schools. Lining up, yes, the curriculum. Everyone wants to talk about the curriculum. Our curriculum is very eclectic at St. Andrew. It's not just about the curriculum. It's lining up the talent. It's lining up the vision. It's training the board. It's lining up those funds. And yes, getting some curricular ideas down. And then I would imagine a 3 to 5 year support cycle where the school is receiving those $200,000, but building their own endowment through the success of the school, through fundraising and tuition collection. And so by the end of, let's say, 3 to 5 years, the school has its own little mini endowment, or it has enough students, it's grown enough students to be sustainable. And those houses that were purchased by this investment fund could be purchased back right? To be kept in-house, to be kept by the school or by the individual teachers or administration. And I think it'd be cool if we had a cycle going of starting schools and supporting these schools, that once they reach that sustainable level where they have their own endowment, where they have their own income from tuition, maybe they could pledge to donate back 1% into the foundation so that the foundation can continue to pay it forward, and start new schools. Smaller schools that are a little bit out of the way or that are smaller parishes could apply for continual funding until as long as the foundation could afford it. This is my idea. How are we going to do this? How are we going to pay for it? Where that money is going to go? I pray that God blesses St. Andrew Academy, Mount Tabor, St. Constantine, John Chrysostom Academy, all those schools, St. John, San Francisco, that are currently doing the education, whether they have know whether it's going to last forever or not, but putting the risk out there, putting the faith out there, the energy. I pray that God will bless all of us and help us to advance Orthodox Christian education in the next coming decades. Through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy upon us and save us. Amen.